I'm James, and this is Ella, and we are here in sunny St. Louis, Missouri, campaigning for Brits abroad. And you can join us. Come on, it'll be fun.
Welcome to the Liberal Democrats abroad.
I'm Tom McAdam, Chair of the Lib Dems in Europe local party.
I'm Kate Brain. I'm Chair of Lib Dems in France.
And I'm George Cunningham, Chair of Lib Dems Overseas Local Party. And let's tell you what we're all about.
We're campaigning for British nationals in Europe and around the world.
We're the only party that has representation in Parliament for Brits living abroad.
In the House of Lords, whether you live in Europe or overseas, we'll look after your interests.
We're supporting British and European businesses, working together to overcome the Brexit hurdles they face.
Our scientists and engineers are world class, and we want to see them collaborating with our European friends to develop clean and green technologies.
We're campaigning for the rights of UK citizens living in Europe to be restored and not further eroded.
Our campaign is succeeding to give the vote to every Brit abroad. Now we need to make sure that we can vote again so that our votes are counted in every general election and referendum.
Campaigning for overseas constituencies so that your voice, our voice, can be properly heard in the House of Commons.
Real democratic representation is a human right.
No matter where we live, campaigning for equal access to COVID vaccines.
500,000 pensioners abroad have been abandoned with their pensions frozen. We are working to put that right.
We want the Foreign Office to look after the rights of Brits abroad properly. We aim to make that happen.
We are concerned about the threats to democracy, human rights and liberalism.
In Hong Kong, there are hundreds of Lib Dem members, supporters and sympathisers. We need to do our best to support them.
Working in hotspots like Afghanistan, alleviating the suffering of ordinary people.
We're 2,000 members in 70 countries, making a difference.
So come to our stand and let's talk about the issues facing Brits abroad.
Have a great day! And good afternoon and welcome back. This session will be debating F16 in your agenda on page 51. That is protecting patients' health data, creating a health data charter and sovereign health data trust. My aides for this session, I'll thank them now because I will forget at the end, are John Ball and Chris Adams. And in a moment, I'll be asking Tim Clement-Jones to move the motion. Tim, are you there? Can I call, please, Tim Clement-Jones to move the motion? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Conference, I'm sure that as Liberal Democrats, we all recognise the benefits of using health data which arises in the course of treating patients in the NHS, for research that will lead to new and improved treatments for disease and for the purposes of public health and health services planning. It's been particularly beneficial in helping to improve the treatment of COVID. The collection of health data can help save lives. However, we also strongly support the right of the individual to choose whether to share their data or not, and to understand how and why their health data is being used. But increasingly, the government, and I'm sad to say agencies such as NHS Digital and NHSX, seem to think that they can share patient data with private companies with barely a nod to patient consent and the proper principles of data protection. We can go back to December 2019 and the discovery by Privacy International that the Department of Health and Social Care had agreed to give free access to NHS England health data to Amazon, which allowed them to develop, advertise and sell, and I quote, new products, applications, cloud-based services and/or distributed software. In other words, for use with its Alexa device. Then take the situation that the health team found earlier this year with GP patient data. We had what has been described as the biggest data grab in the history of the health service. In May, NHS Digital, with minimal consultation, explanation or publicity, and without publication of any data protection impact assessment, published its plans to share patients' primary healthcare data collected by GP practices. Patients were given just 6 weeks to opt out. As a result of campaigning by our health team and many others, including a group of Tower Hamlet GPs who refused to hand over patient data, ministers first announced that implementation would be delayed until 1st September, and then informed GPs by letter in July that the whole scheme would be put on hold, including the data collection. As a result of this bungled approach, more than 1 million people have now opted out of NHS data sharing. The government have had to revise their approach by devising a simpler opt-out system and committing to the publication of a data impact assessment before data collection starts again. They've also stated that access to GP data will only be via a trusted research environment, and have had to commit to a properly thought through engagement and communication strategy. But this is no way to gain public trust in how our NHS data is used. The government must gain society's trust through honesty, transparency and rigorous safeguards. The data held by the NHS must be considered as a unique source of value held for the national benefit. If we're to retain public trust in the use of health data, we need a new framework of a health data charter, as clearly set out in the motion. We need a guarantee that our health data will be used in an ethical manner, assigned its true value and used for the benefit of UK healthcare. A recent report by EY estimated this data could be worth around £10 billion a year in the benefit delivered. Any proceeds from data collaborations that the government agrees to, integral to any replacement or new trade deals, should be ring-fenced for reinvestment in the health and care system with a sovereign health data trust. Retaining control over our publicly generated data, particularly our health data for planning, research and innovation, is vital if the UK is to maintain its position as a leading life sciences economy and innovator. As we set out in the motion, all health data must be held anonymously and accessed through a trusted research environment. We need to restore credibility and trust through guaranteeing greater transparency in how patient data is handled, where it is stored and with whom and what it is being used for. allowing the public to have a say in how NHS data is used, appropriate and sufficient regulation that strikes the right balance between credibility, trust, ethics and innovation, and ensuring service providers that handle patient data operate within a tight ethical framework. Conference, at the moment, that trust is being lost. Our Health Data Charter and Sovereign Health Data Trust are the way to restore it.
Thank you, Tim. Can I ask Dr. Mohsin Khan to stand by, please? And I now call Hannah Betsworth to move Amendment 1. Hannah.
Thank you, Conference. I am going to be very brief because essentially everything that I fully agree with everything that the mover of the motion has said in terms of the value of health data and how it can be transformative for patients. The reason that we've proposed Amendment 1 as the Liberal Democrats in Europe is because the European Union is currently designing its own European health data system, which brings together the national systems of the 27 member states. They retain their own systems, but the idea is that they are all interoperable in the European health data space. So any charter and any system of health data sharing that we in the UK develop should be interoperable with this system in the technical standards and the way that it is developed. The findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data principles refer to the way that data is stored, described, structured and managed in such a way to ensure that it complies with those 4 principles as set out in the acronym. This is simply about ensuring that our efforts align with European efforts going forward with a view to potential future cooperation or rejoining. And I know that that's something that you all value, but even beyond the principle of sharing our data with our closest neighbours, it's valuable for patients and for research. The definition of a rare disease in Europe is one that has a prevalence lower than 5 in 10,000 people. Imagine the effort that we could make, the contribution that we could make if we continue to share our data with other European countries to the benefit of learning more about the natural history of rare diseases and to locate potential participants for clinical trials with their complete consent, of course. Moving on to the second part of our clause, we additionally wanted to speak about consent processes. The reason that I know my stuff about this is that I was a member of the European Health Parliament discussing this issue of health data. We've all seen how complex cookies acceptance requests can get on the internet, and anyone who wants to use your health data should have to ask you in a straightforward, plain language way that is accessible to all citizens, including people with disabilities and people who may have lower literacy skills. We expect that this is going to be fairly uncontroversial at the Liberal Democrat conference. Thank you for giving us the time to introduce this amendment.
Thank you, Anna. So can I ask Lois Norton, please, to stand by, and I now call Dr. Mohsin Khan.
Thank you, Joe. Conference, I back this motion. I am an NHS psychiatrist and a doctor. For a lot of my service users and the patients who trust me, it's important to them that people out there can't work out who they are. There can be a lot of distress over where your data may wrongly end up if you're revealing really personal things to your doctor or your nurse. You can worry how it can affect your job or your families. We need to move beyond stigma, but the reality is it does exist for some people. There's a lot that we can achieve for science through such databases, but there's also been plenty of instances where the trust has been shattered. Every year, you see some NHS trusts or insurers having data leaked out or sold or misused. Some senior doctors have even suggested citizens have a duty to the state to give up data for science as part of having a free healthcare system. No, your right to healthcare is not predicated on giving up data that may have enormous personal value to you. This motion gets that balance right. It gives you the ability to pull back data if things go wrong. It lets you restrict access if you change your mind. A lot of NHS research databases say if you don't opt out in time, they won't remove the data they've already taken from you. Now, if I do an operation on someone, they can say no at any time. That's a clear principle of consent. This motion applies the same with sensitive data. This matters because some anonymous seeming data about you isn't really anonymous. You can put multiple data sets together and you can work out who it might be. Take an example. One local database could say you're in your 20s, you have 3 children, you work in the police, and you have diabetes. Doesn't mention your name or anything like that. A different local database could say you're in the early stages of a police career, have 3 children at a local primary school, have diabetes, and have a mental health condition. I don't need your name for that. I can work out roughly who you are just by putting 2 and 2 together with supposedly anonymous data and maybe some other data that I can find publicly. Once data is out there, it's out. You can't really bring it back. And that's why having the right to be able to opt out later, to be able to have your data removed from data sets when you want it is really important. If you're bothered by people putting together information on you, then you can opt out at any time. That might not be a concern for many people, but there are some people for whom that is deeply concerning. And if they don't have that right, they won't give you that information in the first place, which affects their health. That's why this motion is excellent for expanding that right further. Conference, please back the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're having slight technical difficulties with Lois Norton. We're going to try and come to her without video in the hope that will do the job. Can I ask Leon Devine to stand by? And I now call Lois Norton. Thank you. Have we got Lois Norton? Okay, I think let's try and come back to Lois later. Oh no, here we are. Please,
I'm ready.
Please go ahead.
I'm ready. Okay, I'm an old, long retired IT person with a business applications background rather than technical. My understanding of a trusted research environment is that the researchers can't get at the raw data, they can only run queries against it, i.e. ask questions and receive back summaries of the data, which sounds quite good in principle. And in fact, it's the sort of thing that should apply to other government departments. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think other government departments should have access to my medical data without specific written authorization from me or via a court order. However, no organisation is immune from being hacked. A lot of large organisations have been hacked over the years, and an apology isn't worth the paper it's written on when your data's already been hacked. My concern is the need to ensure that hackers, whatever they do manage to access, cannot get at data which would identify an individual. I'm assuming for starters that the database which is accessible to researchers doesn't include something which can very easily identify an individual. I suspect it will be better to update this database in an offline mode, maybe in some kind of batch mode, rather than leave valuable identification stuff available to all and sundry on the internet. Okay, that's about all I wanted to say. Done.
Thanks, Lois. Thank you. Thank you, Lois. So I now call Piers Allen to stand by, and I call Leon Devine to speak. Leon.
Good afternoon, conference. As a senior IT manager in an acute trust in the Midlands, sharing data with organisations outside of the trust is part of my day job. This includes both with other NHS bodies and with private commercial companies. And one of the current projects we are implementing is what's called shared care records, where we share our data about patients with other public bodies, such as nearby acute trusts, local community care trusts, GPs in our county, as well as with social services and the ambulance service. And I think there's a few other organisations involved as well. But it also means the clinicians in our trust can see the patient data held by these organisations. And it means that everybody has a much better idea and can give much better care to the patients involved. However, there is a danger when so much of this data is held by organisations that have no direct contact with patients. How will you get the consent from patients for the use of their data for planning services in the areas covered by the shared care records? How can we be sure the data will remain within the control of the NHS? And even when it is anonymised, it's only pseudo-anonymised. So, as Mohsin said, it can relatively easily be traced back. And that's why this motion is so important. While there's lots of good work done by the information governance teams in all our trusts, trying to protect patient data and make sure we don't share it improperly and to the wrong people, once that data leaves our trust boundaries, there's very little we can do to control it. And that's why we need a strong legal base to enforce the proper protection. And that's why the proposed Health Data Charter does, and why we should be supporting it. And the amendment, and I know far too much about health data interoperability, and it's not a particularly easy word to say, it can only strengthen the motion, so please support that as well.
Thank you, Leon. I'd like to ask Rob Harrison to stand by to submit on Amendment 1, and I now call Piers Allen. I think you're muted, Piers.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm speaking to highlight that the prescription of a sovereign health data trust in lines 22 to 30 is the best premature and ideally should be omitted until there's a good research evidence that this methodology could work as outlined. Data trusts as a concept still have a long way to go to be operational, with a lot of the existing work on them at a theoretical experimental stage. And the idea needs more trialling before it can be commended as a national solution. But while I believe we should, for now, be more agnostic about whether a data trust specifically is a way forward, the creation of a health data charter, as set out in the rest of the motion, is very key to ensuring that the system of collecting and sharing data is trustworthy and is worthy of the trust of the public. Research by understanding patient data, based at the Wellcome Trust and supported by several leading medical research charities, as well as the National Institute of Health Research, supports a number of key points in the motion. And just briefly, just to highlight some of them, individuals have the right to understand how data is being used. The principle is fundamental, but there is a need for new ways to explain data to people at the right times and moments for them. Preliminary research suggests testing out ways of seeding information about how data is used across lots of interactions with the health system, rather than trying to explain everything in one go, is the best way of building awareness and probably the best way forward. Secondly, transparency is crucial, but so is the definition of transparency. It's not necessarily about publishing everything, but instead should be about making information available about the things that people care about, making it accessible and understandable. This requires a two-way dialogue, listening to people's concerns and openly addressing them. There are certainly financial benefits that need to be invested back into the NHS, and research on data partnerships also supports this point. As a public, do not want NHS organisations to be exploited, especially by commercial organisations. But while the crucial thing here is that improvements to health must be prioritised over financial incentives, setting up some of these systems is not without cost, a cost that could be recovered from third parties who are legitimately using some of the truly anonymised patient data. The use of a trusted research environment is the way forward, but it's not a perfect solution. And there are some areas that will require financial investment as well as further thinking. In its current wording, lines 57 to 64 is a little bit muddled and warrants perhaps greater clarity. So please vote for the motion and the amendment, but I would ask that motion movers address lines 22 to 30 and lines 57 to 64 and take on board the research and experience of organisations such as Understanding Patient Data and the UK Biobank project led by Professor Sir Rory Collins at Oxford University. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd like to ask Sal Brinton to stand by to summate on the motion, and I now call Rob Harrison to summate on the amendment.
Thank you very much indeed, Conference. And wasn't that a fantastic speech by Leon Devane outlining how he works with data throughout the National Health Service? I think that as an advisor to a couple of digital health companies, I've had exactly the same experience that he has. Yes, we are private companies. Yes, we have medical health data that we acquire not just from one country, but we acquire it from several countries. And that's why it's so important that we consider this in the European context. We keep our data really safe and secure. We do everything we can. We work with the data collectors in order to have it. We keep it in a trusted environment. And though I do understand my previous speakers' concerns about that, we are developing tools that will keep data safe. So, members of the conference, I would urge you to support the motion as a whole, but also to consider the European dimension here, because as Hannah said, there are rare diseases out there in which only a handful of people within the United Kingdom suffer from, but which, if we get data sets from throughout the European Union and the European Economic Area, and hopefully possibly beyond that, we will have an opportunity to prepare drugs, to prepare treatments based on evidence, which will help not just the people of the United Kingdom, but will actually help people worldwide. So, conference, please support Amendment 1 and please support the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd like to now finally call Sal Brinton to submit on the motion. Sal.
Conference. What an excellent, if sometimes a bit techie, debate. Tim set out how important it was for us to challenge what the government has been doing in practice, as well as propose something positive for the future. And I want to thank Tim and other colleagues in Parliament for helping the health team to hold this government to account for its appalling behaviour, particularly over primary healthcare data recently. It's good there's a delay, but we haven't yet seen what they're proposing. And I think that this motion will give us Liberal Democrats in Parliament a really strong opportunity to be able to propose what should come next. We very much support the amendment. Thank you to both Hannah and to Rob. This is vital. For years, for decades, we've worked with the EU, and actually, academics still do. But the problem with our government at the moment is that EU is the elephant in the room. Well, not for Liberal Democrats. And it isn't just about rare diseases. It's also about longitudinal studies, looking at how people age and what things change. You need a very, very large number of people participating over decades in research like that. And that data also needs to be collected, not just from the EU, but further around the world as well. Mohsin set out the important point about patient confidentiality. And conference, I have to tell you that the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which has just arrived in the Lords, has a clause in there that proposes that doctors will be forced to hand over patient data to the police, to probation, and to the prison service. No access to the courts to challenge it at all. And I'm moving an amendment to make sure that we try and stop this absolutely at its roots. Patient confidentiality is vital. That's one of the reasons that we've devised the idea of both the Charter and the Sovereign Health Fund, because we need to make sure that everything to do with it is transparent and accountable, and that both doctors and us, the public, as patients, feel confident and safe. Lois, I was really concerned we were going to miss your contribution. You've long spoken to conference about IT issues, and your experience and thoughtfulness was really helpful too. And you may be retired, but you're still on the ball about this. Thank you very much indeed. And Leon and Rob, you spoke from your practical experiences of how actually people have to manage with data exchange. And I think your point about, Leon, about sharing data around different parts of the health service points as much to the problems in England of not having a unified data system. Scotland is ahead of us here. I certainly know that from my own experience. And I have to say that we need to go some way. But both of you spoke about the importance of the public being able to have confidence that their personal data would be protected. And Mohsin made that point as well. Piers made a really important point, which I think both Tim and I will take away, about data trust being in an early stage. And we do understand that, but we're hearing from those researchers using it that actually it appears to be quite safe. But of course, any proposal like this and something that's fairly new, we will make sure that it works before it ever gets to the next stage. One thing is clear, though. It is better than what the government has been proposing over the primary care data that they were proposing to dish out. And my worry is that we'll end up in a position that we were in April this year when we discovered that as part of a contract with the health system, Palantir had been given access to data, pseudonymized, but access to data. That is exactly the sort of thing we are concerned about. Health data in health and research scientists' hands is safe. Health data to commercial companies, as Tim pointed out, like Amazon, is not. So this important motion sets out a clear way forward to ensure that individual personal data is protected while proposing a safe way to collect it to be used to increase knowledge and treatment in our health systems. Support the amendment and support the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Sal. So we have two votes coming up. The first vote will be on the amendment, which is on page 53A of the updated agenda, and that will be appearing any minute now in the polls tab under the auditorium. Can we have that vote, please? And thank you, conference. I have the results of the vote on Amendment 1, and that was 187 in favour and 5 against. So now we go on to a vote on the motion as amended, and that will be appearing in your polls tab now. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. So I have the results of that vote. That is 204 votes in favour and 1 against. So that policy is carried. Thank you everybody for your participation in this debate. Thank you to my aides and the whole team here in the studio. And there'll be a brief pause now before the next session on reports of the parliamentary parties. Have a nice day.
Good morning, conference, and good afternoon, conference even, and welcome to item F17, the reports of the parliamentary parties. The reports are printed on pages 92 to 102 of the reports to conference booklet. We're going to hear from our parliamentary parties in both the Commons and the Lords, and then move on to questions. One question has been submitted in advance, and that's printed on page 54A of your updated agenda. But there will also be time for me to ask some questions from the Q&A tab in the Hop-In auditorium. So please start asking your questions to the parliamentary parties there. Will Lord Newby please stand by? And I now call Wendy Chamberlain MP, our Chief Whip in the Commons, to move the report of the Commons Parliamentary Party.
Thank you very much, John, and good afternoon, conference. Pleasure to be addressing you for the first time at this autumn conference. Now, September marks a year since I became the first female Chief Whip for the Liberal Democrats, and this is my second report, though the third time I've made an appearance at this report stage, given that the very first time I was delivering Alistair Carmichael's report. I'm delighted to be with you here this afternoon. Now, as John referred, members will have seen my report on page 92, of reports to conference, which was written prior to the summer recess. So I want to keep my remarks brief to give more time for questions, but also just to update you on things that have happened since our written report. Now, as I said, my report was written prior to summer recess, and over that period, much has happened. Most notably, that all virtual COVID proceedings in the Commons have now lapsed. And that really has fundamentally changed the job that I've been doing as Chief Whip, because those whips actually do mean something now, and it's important to get everybody there to have the Liberal Democrat voice heard. The first time that we had those back to normal proceedings was the recall over summer recess in relation to Afghanistan, where we heard from both Ed Davey and Layla Moran in that debate. And the other thing I would say is that all parliamentarians have received a significant uptick in casework in relation to Afghanistan, and some of our MPs have incredibly distressing cases. So all credit to MP staff for what they have been dealing with there. Those lapses in proceedings are returned to fully functional or fully normal proceedings in Parliament means that there's now no virtual participation. Proxy voting has ceased. Physical participation in select committees is now required, and there are no call lists. So actually what this means is, in a standard debate, for example, the MP looking to speak in that debate needs to be there from the start. They then need to wait until they are called to speak. They then stay for 2 speeches afterwards, and then they must be back for the wind-ups. So it does take up a great deal of MPs' time. So next time you see one of us on our phone, we're probably going through emails, because that's the only opportunity that we have to do it. It can be quite difficult. But what I want to do is, although we've only been back 2 weeks, there's been lots of opportunities for Liberal Democrat MPs to demonstrate our liberal values across a range of topics. We've been responding to government legislation that's come at pace in relation to national insurance, a tax hike that I'm sure you've all seen last week. The abolishment of the triple lock, which comes to Parliament in all stages on Monday, and changes to the elections bill as it proceeds through Parliament. On Monday, there will be an instruction added to the elections bill, votes withstanding, that will allow the elections bill to include the move to first past the post for mayoral elections and PCCs into the scope of the bill. Clearly something that Liberal Democrats are very strongly against. So to conclude, I just want to highlight some of the things we've already been doing in those first 2 weeks. Christine Jardin's adjournment debate on medical cannabis, Westminster Hall debates from Layla on rough sleeping, and myself on cuts to the British Council. Daisy has been continuing to push her private members bill on fire and building safety, and Alistair had an urgent question on vaccine passports last Thursday, and over the weekend that position from the government changed and there was a U-turn on that. And I fundamentally believe that the UQ was part of that, because it was quite clear there was limited to no support across the House to the government's proposals. And finally, I want to conclude by highlighting Sarah Green. Sarah Green, our new 12th MP, made her maiden speech on Tuesday, 7th of September. If you haven't had a chance to catch it, go to Parliament Live to see it. And she is now well underway. It's great to see that. And the final thing to say is we are recruiting in our Whip's office. We're looking for a parliamentary support officer. It's advertised on Work for MP. Any member interested in potentially coming to work for us in the Commons, please go there to find out. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Wendy. Will Adam Robertson please stand by if he wishes to ask a supplementary? And I now call Lord Newby, our leader in the Lords, to move the report of the Lords Parliamentary Party.
Thanks very much, John. As with Wendy, we have got a report in the conference documentation which people can have a look at. I'd just like to highlight three things from that before looking at what's been happening since we came back. First of all, we were delighted to be able to participate in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, and I was really pleased that 50 of my colleagues did some campaigning in Cheshire and Amersham, and it was a great delight to be able to do that and to get out of Westminster at the same time. Secondly, on a sadder note, in the earlier part of the year, two of our strongest former members and real forces at former conferences died. Tony Greaves, who scared people, scared the platform witless whenever he spoke at party conference because he was always attacking the leadership. And of course, Shirley Williams, who was in a class of her own, one of the most charismatic politicians of her generation. And the third thing, which is something that's carried over into the autumn, was the campaigning work we were able to do, led by Kath Pinnock, on building safety, working with Daisy Cooper, where Kath was able to help push through amendments to the fire safety regs there, which the government didn't accept, but we hope will slowly influence them as they look to making more restitution as we go forward on the terrible building safety scandal. Like the Commons, as we've come into the autumn, we've moved to an almost entirely physical presence as we did before. The good news for us is that we've been able to secure the position whereby 4 of our number, including Sal Brinton, who you heard a few minutes earlier, who've got long-term health conditions, are able to participate virtually. So we've retained the TV screens around the chamber, and Sal and her 3 colleagues who are in the position that they can speak from home but not physically are doing so, much to the fury, I think, really, of the government, because they're all such formidable performers when they take to the airwaves in that way. Since we've come back, we've only been back obviously a fortnight, we've been concentrating very much on the environmental safety bill, the environment bill, where we've demonstrated what we can do when we work with other people. We've beaten the government 14 times, a number of Lib Dem amendments on declaring a climate and biodiversity emergency, protecting pollinators, and other amendments on air quality, single-use plastics, and protecting rivers, for example, have gone through, and we'll be now throwing that bill back to the Commons with those amendments in it. For the remainder of the autumn, I think our lives are going to be largely dominated by the police crime sentencing and courts bill, which Sal referred to earlier, where there are a whole host of measures proposed which are draconian and illiberal. So Brian Paddock will be leading for us on that, and I hope again that we'll be able to defeat the government on a whole raft of issues. It can be argued, what's the point in beating the government in the Lords if the Commons throw them back in our face? Well, sometimes they don't throw them back in our face. But even if they do, it's been very important in the interim to be able to demonstrate at a lot greater length than our colleagues in the Commons are able to do how liberal values can be translated into detailed scrutiny and opposition to illiberal proposals by this government. And whether it's on that police crime sentencing and courts bill, on, for example, the higher education freedom of speech bill or the elections bill, we'll continue to be putting up a robust opposition to the government and promoting liberal values to the best of our ability. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Dick. We now move to the question submitted in advance from Adam Robertson about avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Can you answer this first, please, Wendy?
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, we are as a party concerned that people with an eating disorder get the help that they need and deserve. And indeed, Vera Bobhouse with BEAT has worked incredibly hard on this. Were we to be in power, we'd introduce standing waiter times for adults and children to get the treatment that they need quickly. And we are noting that medical students receive less than 2 hours of teaching on eating disorders throughout their undergraduate training. But on the specific topic of avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, very happy to correspond and raise some written parliamentary questions to get some answers which can help inform our policy further. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Dick, would you like to add anything to that answer?
Just to say that Kate Parliamentary in the Lords has already established a very strong reputation as campaigning on anorexia. And so we can, I'm sure, add this particular disorder to that agenda for her. And I'll be in touch with her to discuss that.
Thank you, Dick. Adam, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
Yes, please. Yeah, so I appreciate the answers because there's 19,000 people within the UK who suffer from ARFID, but I know there's one lady who's got a BMI of 13.2 who suffers from ARFID, is too weak to walk, and she contacted Nadine Dorries when she was the health minister, and Nadine was talking about funding eating disorders for children and young people for ARFID, but there's nothing for adults, so adults are being let down. So if you're an adult with ARFID, you're looking at private options which cost up to £15,000 to get treatment. So will the Parliamentary Party push for this to be rectified immediately and agree to meet as sort of a group of us? Because, you know, some people cannot afford to get the proper treatment for this condition, and the government doesn't seem to be listening.
Yeah, so can you answer that, please, Wendy?
Yep, thank you very much for that supplementary question, Adam. More than happy to pick up with you, and indeed through the conference arrangements, we'll get in touch directly and determine the most appropriate MP for your group to meet with. But as I say, happy to table some follow-up with some parliamentary questions in relation to that response from Nadine Dorries. And I can't think who the new minister in her place will be, but we'll get some responses. If they've already committed to funding for young people, surely they should be looking to do likewise for adults. But thank you very much for raising the topic.
Thank you. So we now move to questions in the Q&A. So the first one, I think I'll ask Dick to respond first, because the other one's specifically to Wendy. So this is from Tracy Gallagher. What will our party do to stop the SNP from destroying our entire country, including Scotland, that is the United Kingdom? We are all one nation. Dick.
Well, we're in a very peculiar position in the Lords because the SNP refused to sit in the Lords. So we're an almost entirely unionist chamber. So what we're unable to do, which our colleagues in Scotland and to a lesser extent in the Commons are able to do, is to hold them to account directly. I mean, I think I'm very conscious as an Englishman that the battle about independence is going to be fought and won largely in Scotland. If I were advising the government, however, I would tell the Prime Minister to try and avoid doing things which seem gratuitously to annoy the Scots and to be consistently reasonable and consistently just make the arguments about how together we're able to deal with issues like the vaccines for coronavirus in a much more satisfactory way than we could as 4 separate countries within the United Kingdom. But I think Boris needs, this of course is largely wishful thinking. He needs to show a degree of statesmanship in his approach to common issues facing Scotland and the other nations of the UK, rather than his typical sort of boy's own, jingoistic, over-the-top triumphalism. But Wendy's the great expert on this rather than me, I suspect.
Thank you, Dick. Yes, exactly. I was moving on to Wendy. Obviously, this is an issue close to your heart. Wendy, what would you like to...
Yeah, that's quite the expectation that Dick has set there. I suppose what I would say is in 2019, I was the only person to take a seat from the SNP. So absolutely shows that it can be done. And indeed, our party is well placed to do that. There's no doubt that the May elections showed that voters are still voting along constitutional lines. And the reality is in first past the post contests that they become between the SNP and whichever party, pro-UK party, they believe can defeat the SNP. So actually moving forward, our party continuing to campaign for proportional representation is certainly part of the answer to that. And of course, you saw in May, for all that the SNP won the most seats, they fell short of a parliamentary majority, which shows you what proportional representation can do. In terms of what our party continues to do, I think what I would say is we are the only party that still fundamentally believes in devolution and is keen to see it enacted. A third of our parliamentary party is Scottish. No other UK party can say that. And so what I can reassure you is the Scots have a very strong voice at our parliamentary table with Christine, Alistair, Jamie and myself. I can promise you we're not backwards at coming forwards. We're well informed in the debate. But I really do think that there's an issue here of time. Nicola Sturgeon has obviously set out to her party and Parliament in Scotland intention to hold an independence referendum in 2023. I think we are going to be dealing with this pandemic and the economic arguments of it for some time to come. And I find it difficult to believe that we will move forward to an independence referendum then, particularly with the Conservatives continuing to turn it down. But I agree with Dick. I do believe that the Conservatives sometimes are the most enabled of recruiting sergeants for the SNP cause. The Internal Market Bill and other steps do make it feel that devolution is not being respected, and that's again where I believe the Liberal Democrats can come forward. We believe in devolution. We want to see a federal UK, and that is actually a way of ensuring that across these islands everybody is best represented, and we'll continue to do that. But thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for that comprehensive answer. I think we're just going to have time for one more question, which is specifically to Wendy. And this is from Julie Adnams-Hatch. Firstly, my thanks for your continuing engagement with LDDA. My question is whether there can be any further moves towards correcting the DWP's miserable treatment of claimants. So that's for Wendy.
Thanks very much, Julie. It's always good to connect with you and your LDDA colleagues. Yeah, as DWP spokesperson, I believe it's really important to connect in with our recognised organisations because that's where the expertise lies, that lived experience within the party. Obviously, from a casework perspective, all our MPs will be dealing and working with DWP casework. But I think in terms of claimant experience, I think the disability green paper is clearly something that we need to be asking the government about. I see Chloe Smith has moved into DWP with a specific role in that. I may not agree with her politics, but I've always found her somebody who is willing to listen and to hear. So I'm hoping to engage with her soon. And I think we need to continue to break down the sort of faceless aspect of the DWP. The final thing I would say is clearly there are different ways to go. Now, I may not be a supporter of the SNP in government, but there's no doubt that the new social security service in Scotland is culturally different. It treats people, or it sets out within its statements to treat people with dignity and respect. And certainly in my own role in Scottish Affairs Committee, from the stakeholders that were present and gave evidence, that was clear. And that's where the Liberal Democrats come in at a UK level of introducing, policies and measures that treat people with the dignity and respect that they need. The safety net is insufficient, and there are people who will never be in a position where they can work, and it's for us as a society to support them.
Thank you, Wendy. So we'll now move to a vote on whether to receive the reports of the parliamentary parties. So, Chris, please can you start the vote? And conference, you have 2 minutes to vote in the polls tab. Thank you, Conference. You cast 178 votes to receive the reports of the parliamentary parties and 1 vote against. So Conference has received the reports overwhelmingly. I'd like to thank Wendy and Dick for their interesting contributions and everyone who submitted questions. And I'd also like to thank my aides Beck Scott and Chris Adams. There'll now be a brief pause while I hand over to Cara Jenkinson, who will chair the Leaders Q&A. Thank you.
Good afternoon, conference. We now move on to the Leaders Q&A, and I am delighted to welcome Sir Ed Davey. We'll be taking questions across a wide variety of areas that have been submitted in advance, and each questioner will get the chance to ask a supplementary question. If time permits, we will also be taking questions from the audience. If you could put your questions in the Q&A tab, just so they don't get confused with the contents of the chat. So we now move on to our first question, and for Ed, which relates to health. So, question from Richard Flowers. The government is raising an unfair tax on workers, saying it's for social care, but spending it on the NHS. What would you do? What would we do differently?
Well, good afternoon, conference. It's great to be here. I hope you're enjoying yourself. And Cara, thank you for you and your team. And Richard, thank you for a really important question. I don't think you'll be surprised to know that this is a really unfair tax the government decided to go for. The fact that it hits lower paid people, that it's hitting younger people, and that's when the main beneficiaries of their policies are people with high value properties, which tend to be wealthier older people. So there's no doubt this is an unfair package the government put forward. And what's even more frustrating is that it won't fix social care. I'll come to that in a minute. But Richard, you're right. We need to have an alternative. And I don't think you'll be surprised to know that we had a fair alternative. We had it in our manifesto. We had a penny on income tax for NHS and social care, which would have raised a huge amount of money earlier. We knew we needed to act early, didn't we? And I think we can be proud of a party that was there years before the government or indeed anyone else. Of course, the Conservatives, National Insurance Rise, not only is it unfair, not only does it not fix social care, but they didn't tell anyone about it. It's complete broken promise, and therefore I think it's right that we are very critical of them on that. I do want to focus on this issue, first of all, about the social care package and what's wrong with it. You will have seen that most of the money is, at least for the first 3 years, going to the health service. There's very little going to social care. I've spoken to people in local government who are saying actually it's going to make the situation worse, because by the time local government have paid the employers' national insurance contributions, they're going to be worse off, and therefore social care is not going to be helped. So this doesn't fix it from the money side, at least for the first 3 years. And most people think that the government's not going to then suddenly switch money out of the NHS. So really worried about the funding side not being enough. But the two real practical issues, and this is a bit of a dress rehearsal for my speech tomorrow, because you won't be surprised to know I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about care and carers. The big issues are the lack of carers. There was about 120,000 vacancies in the social care sector before the pandemic, and it's got worse. Unpaid carers, family carers, that I've been talking about for a long time now, that they're not even in this package. So it absolutely fails at the first stage. And we as a party should be really proud. We have been the voice of a fair solution with a proper care package. We have been the voice of carers, and I'm determined we continue to be, but show there is a fair way of sorting out these problems.
Thank you very much, Ed. So if I could ask Richard Flowers if you have a supplementary question.
Thank you, and thank you, Ed, for that excellent answer. Obviously, it is wonderful to know that we are the party that has been focusing on the needs of social care and carers. In terms of the money, the government has chosen to use a national insurance route, but might this be a time when we talk more about merging national insurance and income tax? Because obviously the differences between national insurance and income tax are what makes NI so much more unfair. And this might be an opportunity to say, actually, if we're going to be delivering social care for older people, it's a time when they could pick up that income tax burden that doesn't stop at that level. The other alternative, of course, is a Lib Dem favourite. We should be just taxing wealth and not income.
Richard, I think we do need to have a wider debate about how we fund social care, health and beyond. Our party's been brave enough to both put forward clear policies, unlike the others. We've talked about having a cross-party debate about long-term reforms. I mean, Norman Lamb was fantastic on that, you remember. And we have, as a party, have focused on a whole range of issues. You talk about the idea of bringing national insurance and income tax together. I think there has some merits. There are one or two tricky aspects of it. One of the merits would be that you take some low-paid people out of national insurance if you did it in a fair way, because as you know, people start paying national insurance contributions before they pay income tax. We raised the income tax threshold to take the low pay out of work. The Tories haven't raised the national insurance lower earnings limit. So if you wanted to bring them together, you could do it in a way which helped the low paid. It's one of the reasons why this tax actually is hitting low paid rather than our income tax proposal, because low paid workers start paying it before they pay income tax. So that would be one reason why you might want to start bringing these together. The other reason, I'm sure you know, is that unearned income, investment income, doesn't pay national insurance contributions. So there's definitely arguments for reform in that area. There are some pitfalls. Let's remember that pension income doesn't have national insurance contributions on it. So you need to think about that as you brought tax systems together, because there are some poorer pensioners who you wouldn't want to clobber at all. So there are some issues, but let's have a debate about it. I think we should take forward the debate in our party, maybe at another conference. Richard, put forward a motion. And I also think we should challenge the other parties. We've been upfront and clear. It's about time they were.
Thanks very much, Ed. So another question around health, and this time from Charlie Halstead, who asks, urgent and emergency health services have been under immense pressure for 2 years, and many staff are burning out. How will the Lib Dems reach out and support us?
Well, Charlie, thank you for the question. And can I thank you and the people you work with, in fact, everyone in the NHS for their amazing work during this period. I think we all deserve to thank them. Thank you. And you know what? I'm sure you were, and people watching were all out there clapping. But I was pretty angry when the government did so little for NHS workers who made such sacrifices. And I want to come on to what we would have done. But I think it's important to state our thanks and also to remember the sheer scale of the sacrifices. I'm sure you read the stories like I did of people who had to move out of their house to protect their families because they were going into hospitals every day and they didn't want to bring COVID back, particularly when they had relatives who were elderly or relatives who were had immune conditions. So I think the sacrifices made by so many NHS workers and indeed care workers, something we must remember. And I don't think we can really recover this from this pandemic if we think about those people who did sacrifice so much. And of course, remember all those NHS workers who lost their lives. What will we do? I think there's a number of things I'd like to see us doing. And we actually have been campaigning on these. The first is to make sure there are more nurses, more health workers, more care workers. The vacancies that we've seen are still see are huge, and that puts extra pressure on you. It's made the job of health workers during this pandemic even more difficult. So we've got to recruit more staff, and the questions, of course, are how you do that. First of all, we should blame the Tories. They've made this problem of staff shortages so much worse, both with their cuts and Brexit. And I give you one of their cuts, an example. They reduced the bursaries for student nurses, and that meant that the numbers of people going forward to go into nursing reduced dramatically. And we're living with the consequence of that now. They have at long last reversed that decision, but the damage has continued. So that's one area that we need to look at. Another area, of course, visas. Brexit and the new immigration policies of the shockingly awful Priti Patel have created a real shortage of staff. I've seen it at our local hospital, no doubt, Charlie, you've seen it where you worked. And I think unless we have a real programme to recruit and to enable people to come from abroad who want to work in our NHS, I don't think we will deal with that vacancy issue, which is really key to tackling the pressures. And of course, part of that is pay. And I'm sure you shared my horror when the Conservatives originally only wanted to put pay up by 1%, which would have been a pay cut. And I think, frankly, the rise of 3% isn't going to be sufficient by the time you take account of inflation. So I don't think the pay rise that they're proposing is going to be sufficient, particularly when you factor in the rise in national insurance, that there are some healthcare workers who need universal credit who aren't going to get it, or at least going to lose the £1,000 rise that they had during the pandemic. So I think there are huge pressures, and the government aren't going to tackle them. I think we should be proud. I'd like to actually call out Christine Jardine for all her work when she was our Home Affairs spokesperson. You remember she campaigned for an automatic right to stay for health workers who've been working in our NHS. And she had a private members bill taking a much more liberal approach to immigration for people working in our NHS and care services. Christine did a great job on that, and it was just a shame that the government didn't listen to us. I think there are other issues, and Charlie, I'm actually going to ask for your ideas on this. Ask me a supplementary, but I'd love to hear what you think too. Munira Wilson, our health spokesperson, has been talking about the mental health of health workers and carers who've been under so much pressure and seen so many people dying, so many people seriously ill, and had to make personal sacrifices. And I think we need far, far more support and help to people who've been under such pressure. But Charlie, I'd like to, if you don't mind, let me know your thoughts.
Okay, unfortunately, Charlie isn't online.
Charlie.
Yes.
Charlie.
Do put forward your supplementary question, Charlie. Yay.
So my supplementary has to be around that mental health. I work as a 999 emergency call handler and dispatcher. Currently, the last 2 years, we have been surviving on overtime and goodwill. The fact is, and I suspect emergency and urgent and all healthcare services have been doing the same thing. We need more staff, we need more money, and we need people to understand that we're struggling and that we cannot give any more. How are the Lib Dems going to deal with the fact that we are burnt out, we cannot work any more shifts than we have already worked, and it doesn't matter how much people are offering to pay us in incentives or overtime, we haven't got anything left to give and we need more people. And if healthcare workers choose to take industrial action over the 3% rise, half of which we're losing because of the NI raise, are the Lib Dems going to stand with us on picket lines?
Well, Charlie, thank you very much. And again, thank you for the work you do. I think you remind us that while we obviously always think about nurses and doctors and consultants and so on, there's so many people working to keep us safe. 999 call dispatchers like yourselves, ambulance staff, paramedics and so on. And that's why I think we should stand with people like yourselves and work with you to improve pay, conditions, and, as you said, get more staff. And I think that's the critical thing, isn't it? We really need to make sure there are more staff because, as you said, extra pay and overtime, if you're already exhausted, isn't going to be very attractive. You need more colleagues. And that's what I think we need to argue for, and we need to argue working with you. I'll give you an example. I very recently met the RCN in London to look at some of the issues that they're talking about, and we were talking about all the issues about the challenges going forward, and I'm determined to work with the RCN and with others to get a good deal.
Thanks very much, Ed, and to Charlie as well. I'm going to ask just one more question in relation to health, which has come in from the audience. Mental health care and advice for children is inadequate to the point of being non-existent. Children with problems can become problem adults. How would the Liberal Democrats solve this huge problem?
Well, we have actually been leading campaigns in Parliament on this. Manira Wilson, our health spokesperson, has had a number of debates and asked a number of questions because, again, we feel the government aren't spending anywhere enough attention or resource on this. Again, there are shortages of qualified, trained people, and the government just aren't being joined up enough to make this a priority. In my own constituency, I'm very worried about the child, adolescent and mental health services, what are sometimes sometimes known as CAMS, and CAMS is seriously underfunded in my constituency, and I get the impression across England. So we absolutely have to do more. And when I talk about joined up, I mean joined up with our schools as well to get early intervention. I was talking to Sutton Borough Council the other day, the amazing Ruth Dombey, who leads that for us, talking to Bobby Dean, our new candidate in Carshalton and Wallington, and some other Sutton councillors about what Sutton Council has been doing. They're putting workers into schools who are trained on mental health issues so they can work with the teachers who are involved in pastoral care. And I think that sort of approach, which we can be proud of, is the way to play our role where we can, but we must campaign, as Manira has been doing, to get this government to take this seriously.
Thanks very much, Ed. So we now move on to a couple of questions on climate change, which also bring up some wider questions on electoral strategy. So the first question comes from Heather Pridurch. Apologies if I've pronounced that wrong. Can we please young people everywhere and put fighting climate change at the heart of our message and purpose?
Heather, a resounding yes. Let me give you a bit of background. When I first got interested in politics, I hadn't joined a political party. I think I was about 17, 18. And I had a year off and I read loads of books. People who've heard me speak will know that I read a book by an environmental campaigner called Jonathan Porritt called Seeing Green. That got me into the environment, from climate change to protecting our nature. And that got me into issues around equality, to issues around development in the poorest countries in our world, and issues around peace and so on. And as a young person a few years ago, those were the issues that really motivated me. And I looked around different political parties who got the answers, and actually it was Liberal Democrats who I could see had the answers. And so for me, it's actually fundamental to who we are as a party. And we need to get that out to people as much as we can. And so I just encourage everybody that we need to make our voice heard as much as possible on this. And sort of when I talk about it to young people in schools and colleges and universities, I try to make some links. I try to explain both how dramatic and dangerous climate change is, but also if we tackle climate change, we can be progressive in so many other areas as well. So the story I tell is of a minister who I met at a conference on climate change when I was Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. It was a UN conference. And the minister was the minister for the Marshall Islands in the Pacifics. Tony DeDrum, I think his name was. Tony DeBrum. And Tony said, did people realize that his people were being deprived of clean, fresh water because the rising sea levels were making their wells salty? Did people realize that some of his people went to bed at night with life jackets on? They were so worried about the rising sea levels. And the stories that minister from Marshall Islands told me brought it home to me really clearly. Climate change is happening. It's happening fast, and it's very dangerous to people and our planet. And so we have to be right at the front of the campaigning on climate change. We've got a proud record, but we need to articulate a vision that people can relate to. So the vision I tell, the story I tell, is that we need to build on the amazing renewable success that Liberal Democrats have been behind in this country, but to make sure that it's global. Because we all know, don't we, that however well we do, it matters nothing. We've got to have a global solution to climate change. So we need renewables being deployed across the world, and we need to support people, whether it's through our development budget or through economic and financial policies, the spread of these renewable technologies. And if we do, here's the great thing. Not only can we tackle climate change, as we must, but we could also do something about equality in our world. We could do something about poverty in our world. Because at the moment, the poorest people, rural Africa, rural Asia, rural Latin America, some of the big cities around the world, they don't have power, they don't have electricity, it's too expensive for them. And they can't get it because the fossil fuel companies won't run cables to their properties or to their villages. One of the wonderful things about renewables, particularly solar, but also wind and hydro, is you can have them self-standing micro solar grids in villages that are very remote. That means we can take electricity to some of the poorest people in our world, and they can keep their medicines cool, their food cool, and young people can get education opportunities. So I think we should be really excited when we talk to young people about what tackling climate change means. It means saving our planet, yes. It also means tackling poverty. And here's the final part of what I would say to attract young people to our really grand internationalist vision. We could also promote peace. Why? Because the money that people spend on fossil fuels, on oil and gas and coal, an awful lot of it ends up in the pockets of dictators. Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the President of Venezuela. And they use that money from fossil fuels to sow conflict. Let's take the money away, the fossil fuel money away from these dictators that will reduce conflict. So let's inspire young people, partly with our record and our values, which are so progressive, but with a vision that we can really change our world if we're serious about climate change.
Thanks very much, Ed. And Heather, do you have a supplementary question for Ed? Please ask your question now, Heather. And if you can make sure you're unmuted.
Question.
Did you say no supplementary?
Yes, sorry, did you not hear me? I beg your pardon. Right.
Okay, that's no supplementary question. Okay, fine. So let's move on then to the second question that relates to climate change, but also relates to broader issues of electoral strategy. So this is a question from John Shoesmith, and he asks, since there is a desperate climate emergency, why are we fighting the Green Party and Labour for the pro-environment vote?
Well, we have lots in common with many other people who focus on the environment. I mean, I've been in Parliament for 10 years, often sitting next to Caroline Lucas. When it comes to climate change, we share very, very many ideas and policies and priorities. And the importance of getting cross-party consensus and consensus across the world is absolutely vital. But the reality is, at Westminster elections, it's really clear that the Greens can't take a single seat off the Conservatives. Indeed, the Greens have never taken any Westminster seat off the Conservatives. And in the first past the post, the unfair electoral system, which we want to get rid of, there's no chance of them doing that. And because we have got such strong environmental policies, a fantastic record on climate change, I think we can make the case that we can be the ones, if we can beat all those Conservative MPs, who can be the MPs of climate action in Parliament. And look at the evidence. In Cheshire and Amersham, it was really clear. The progressive vote came behind us. Green voters and Labour voters realised that not only was Sarah Green strong on the environment, but Sarah was the best placed progressive candidate to beat the Conservatives. And Green voters are told that. I don't know whether, I'm sure you did, John went to Cheshire and Amersham. I went 16 times and I kept hearing that. And people wanted to back Sarah and the Liberal Democrats to beat the Conservatives, which of course we did. But here's the challenge when people debate this issue of party strategy. For us to beat the Conservatives, so we get more MPs who want to take serious climate action and take it urgently, we've got to beat a lot of Conservative MPs by switching Conservative voters, liberal Conservatives, soft Conservatives, as all canvassers know. And to switch those soft Conservatives, we've got to appeal to them and put over our arguments that, whether it's on the environment or on small business or carers or education or whatever it may be. And I actually think for those voters who we need to switch to beat Conservatives, get Boris Johnson out of government and to take action on climate change, I think we've actually, we're better placed than the Greens are. I think the Greens don't always appeal to those Liberal Tories who are going to decide the next election. I think we have a heavy responsibility to make sure we beat as many Conservative MPs in the next election as possible. And that responsibility starts and begins with tackling climate change.
Thank you very much. And John, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. I'm a local councillor. We've declared a climate emergency. I'm bound to say it's a deeply frustrating thing to have declared because we have virtually no power compared with the Westminster government. I do believe the word emergency means emergency. Normally, you change everything in an emergency in order to deal with it. I don't believe our party is currently showing that through its actions it really thinks this is an emergency. With appropriate action, we could take power in Westminster and make life a heck of a lot easier for local government like me. Why don't we treat this as an emergency is the question.
Thank you.
John, I could not agree more, both in the need to see this as an emergency. My own council's passed sounds like a very similar motion to yours in developing a whole strategy to tackle it. We run Kingston Council. And I know there are lots of local councillors across the country and possibly across parties who really want to see power pushed down to councils who want to get on with this. And I think it's absolutely essential. I don't think we'll be able to tackle climate change unless local authorities and local communities and local people are empowered far more. And that indeed is part of my message tomorrow in my speech. I also think that we've seen in the recent emergency around the pandemic what is possible, what can be done if governments address an issue as an emergency. So I think you're right. I think the government has failed. It's one of the reasons why I have argued for a £150 billion investment programme, a climate emergency investment programme. It completely smashes the Conservatives' proposals, which are tiny. I think they're less than 10 billion when you look at the new money they're putting forward. It's nothing. It's not changing the dial. You've got to do something big in the way I'm proposing. My proposal is much more in line with President Biden's when he talked about a Green New Deal. Biden's, and we can criticise Biden for other things perhaps, but on the green agenda, I think he is showing leadership in the United States and is making the case that this is a climate emergency and there needs to be rapid, urgent action taken. So I think we, as a progressive party, need to make that case, need to show that we've got a really ambitious programme and that it stands up to the emergency that we need. The programme I've outlined that is very much in line with what Liberal Democrats said at the last election, I think would respond to the level of emergency we need.
Thanks very much, Ed. So we now move on to a couple of questions about the EU. So the first is from Richard Whelan. Given the recent food and labour shortages we've seen, at what point do we commit ourselves to a roadmap to rejoin the EU?
Thank you very much, Richard. There is no doubt that the food and labour shortages are extremely serious and are at very least in part, if not in the main, caused by Brexit. We're seeing shortage of lorry drivers, as everyone knows. We're seeing shortage in care workers, in construction workers. We're seeing shortage in farm workers. We're seeing shortages of trained skilled people at our abattoirs. Across the piece, Brexit is affecting the workforce seriously and is leading to these food and labour shortages. It's really good that we've got an emergency motion, I think being proposed by Sarah Olney, to look at the supply chain issues caused by Brexit, by COVID and other things. And I think it'll give us a chance at this conference to send a very clear signal on this issue. I am proud that every Liberal Democrat MP voted against this botched Brexit deal. I think we sent a strong signal that we thought this deal would not work, would be damaging, and the evidence is coming in that we were right. Of course, let me be frank with you and the whole conference. We don't set the political weather. We don't decide what the top issue that people are concerned about is. And we do have to talk to what people's concerns are. It's right that we do in a democracy. We address their concerns, whether it's on education or health or care or small business or whatever it may be. But at the same time, I strongly believe that we must make our case as a pro-European party, as a proudly pro-European party. That's why I'm strongly supporting the Federal Policy Committee's decision to set up a working group on Europe, led by Duncan Brack and Layla Moran, that's looking at a whole set of issues They brought forward, I'm not sure if it's been debated yet, I don't think it has, this motion on cultural ties, bringing up issues like visas for musicians, showing the damage, huge damage caused by Brexit. So I think we are showing leadership, both in the motions we're debating, in the working group that the FPC has set up, and the arguments we're making in Parliament. We will always be Britain's most pro-European party.
Thank you. And perhaps time for a quick plug for this evening, where we'll be hearing from Elton John and Michelle Barnier talking about the implications for musicians of Brexit. So one more quick question, so you could address it quite briefly, on the EU, from Alessandra Rossetti. EU citizens are contributing, like others, to the growth of UK PLC, but the wave of populism has reached the UK too, and many prefer to leave. Why should they stay? Do you see a better future?
Thank you so much for that question. I don't know about you, but it makes me very sad. It's really sad to see our friends and neighbours and work colleagues feel that they're not wanted anymore. I don't know about you, I've had some really distressing conversations with people. A person I used to work for a little while ago on renewable energy said, he's Dutch, he said he went to his Waitrose supermarket in Bath, of all places, a very pro-European city, quite soon after the referendum, and someone said, well, I thought you was, they'd heard his accent, it was Dutch, and they said, well, you should be going home now. The fact this has been his home forever, and he's married to a British person and so on. And I'm sure we've all got anecdotes like that. And it's just horrific. And we need to do, as individuals, as a political party, everything we can to show to our European friends and neighbours that they're welcome. We welcome them. We want them to stay. We value them as equals. And everything that our party does and says, our policies, need to make that absolutely crystal clear. And, you know, it's not only the right thing to do, because how dare the government allow this discrimination and this ill feeling to fellow human beings to go the way it has. It's in our own interest. It's in our economic interest. It's in our interest as a country. That's why this government is so dreadful. We've got to beat them. And we've got to beat them on behalf of those EU citizens. I mean, if you need any motivation to go out there and beat the Conservatives, it's on behalf of those EU citizens.
Thank you very much, Ed. We turn now to the subject of housing, which will be debated later on this evening on F20. But the question now is from Andrew Emerson, and it's, what can the party do to balance language on house building that neither turns off local communities or young people who just want to see houses built for their future?
Well, we have to be clear as a party that we want to build more houses, but particularly more council houses, more affordable houses, and houses that are sustainable and meet top environmental standards. We said that in our manifesto. We should keep saying that. And I want to make clear to people that just because we have opposed Tory planning reforms, because they're the wrong reforms, doesn't mean that we're against house building. We just want the right houses in the right places, not the wrong houses in the wrong places. And it was Theresa May who said the Tory reforms would have resulted in the wrong houses in the wrong places. So I'm proud that we fought against those Tory planning reforms. Sarah Green's amazing success in Cheshire and Amersham, it shows that they now feel the threat from us because they're retreating. Whether they get rid of them in their entirety, we will see in due course. I don't trust the Conservatives. You'll be shocked to know, given that developers paid them, I don't know, what is it, 12 million, 13 million pounds. 25% of the Tory party's income now comes from developers. So I think we know where their vested interests are. So let's see if they get rid of them. But we should continue to criticise the Tories for the way they go about house building. Those reforms would have reduced the amount of affordable houses built. The Tories have got rid of a regulation that Liberal Democrats passed for zero carbon homes. That's how much they care about the environment. So we should stand up tall and proud that we are building homes. My wife is a councillor in Kingston. She has the housing portfolio. We talk a lot about this issue. And she's building lots of council houses. We're building more council houses in Kingston than we have for 40, 50 years to a high environmental standard. I was talking to South Cambs Council recently, Liberal Democrats there, building more houses than even the government wanted to, because they know it's the right thing to do, but they're building with those houses with the consent of the local community, bringing the community with them, because they're meeting the needs of the local community with affordable houses for young people and young families and lower paid workers. So, I do think we need to be clear where our party is on this. I think listen to our local government campaigners, listen to ALDC. I think they are really clear that our local authorities do want more houses, but we want the powers at local government to shape the communities in the way that the representatives of local government think is best. And indeed, Liberal Democrat policies goes further than that. I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. It may even be in the motion. I'm sorry that I haven't read it in its entirety. That's a bit of a confession. But I think it was Don Foster and Andrew Stunnell, when they were ministers at the Department of Housing, Communities and Local Government, they passed new laws for neighbourhood planning. And those of you who aren't aware of those laws, Conservatives are trying to dilute them because developers don't like them. Neighbourhood planning puts power in the hands of neighbourhoods, of communities. And they can come together, either working with the local authority or even not, to put forward ideas for new homes and new community facilities. And those plans can be put to a local referendum. There have been over 800 neighbourhood plans since that Liberal Democrat law went in. And there was a study of how that Liberal Democrat neighbourhood planning law has been working. It was a study produced by the government department last year. So under the Conservatives, the relevant department published a report on how our planning policy was working. Do you know what the report said? It said neighbourhood planning increases housing supply, i.e. gets more houses built. Neighbourhood planning makes sure those houses are more sustainable, higher environmental standards. It's what people want. And neighbourhood planning better reflects societal needs. That's what the report said. What it meant and what it showed in the wider report was it produced more affordable homes. So our proposal, our way, which ALDC and others are talking about, are putting in action in local authorities run by Liberal Democrats. We're making sure those houses are built, but we're making sure they're built with the consent of the community, with the engagement and involvement of the community, and we're making sure that they're affordable for young people. So I hope that contribution helps the debate. I don't want to intrude further on the democracy in our party at the conference, but we have got planning. We've got a proud record. We're doing it in local government. Do listen to our local government champions.
Thank you very much. And could I ask Andrew Emerson if you have a supplementary question for Ed?
Yes, I do have a supplementary. Thanks for the very detailed answer, Ed, but actually I think it kind of crystallises my point about the language that is used. You've talked very heavily about permission from communities to buy into these things. But as we see, too many young people at the moment are simply shut out of those communities. They don't have one as renters. They're shut out of the home owning communities. And the more we talk about, yes, we want houses, but what I fear what young people are hearing is, yes, but we don't want you part of those communities. Those communities matter more than you gaining access to them. So I just wonder if I could bring it slightly back to that language and talk, can we think about how we include those who want to become part of those communities who feel shut out of them at the moment.
Well, I think you make a fair point that we need to always be ensuring that our language is inclusive, and we need to reach out to communities whose voice may not normally get heard. I mean, that's core to who we are as Liberal Democrats. You know, whether it's being the voice of carers or the voice of young people, the voice of the homeless, we need to make sure that the voice of the powerless or the less powerful are heard. I think that's core to who we are. And my impression from Liberal Democrat local authorities and Liberal Democrat councillors is they do listen to people who may well not turn up to all those meetings. I'm obviously going to mention my wife again. She does an awful lot of work on homelessness issues. And you know, in my surgery over 20 years, in my constituency surgeries, homeless people, people in overcrowded accommodation, people in unfit accommodation, they've always been the sort of big part of my casework. And for me, they're always in my mind when I'm thinking about housing policy and the need to make sure we do get those houses built, but we get the right houses built in the right place. And therefore, I take your point. Let's make sure we as a party are bringing in everybody to this discussion. I think that's a really well made, a point really well made.
Thank you very much, Ed. So we now move on to a question on our international role, and it's from Adam Robertson. Do we need to stop delusions of grandeur of our status within the international arena and have the honest conversation with ourselves that we are no longer a nation with unilateral clout or influence? Ed.
I can't think who you're thinking of with this question. Could it possibly be Boris Johnson? What are they like? It's almost like they think we rule the world or something, isn't it? There's sort of this imperial politics of Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. You know, we've rarely had such an English nationalist, inward-looking, insular government that tries to make out it's some imperial force. Well, I just think it's such bad politics for international relations. I just think it's wrong. I think it's unpatriotic. I actually think it's undermining the national interest, the way Boris Johnson is going about our foreign policy. It really makes me angry. I think it's diminishing Britain's role in the world by making claims that he can't substantiate. And we're living in a dangerous world. Obviously, there's climate change, and I want to come to that, but you know, the battle between the superpowers, the rise of China, we need to be thinking through these issues with a degree of subtlety and diplomacy, which is just lacking totally in number 10. Dominic Raab was not that skillful at it, let's be clear. He wouldn't even pick up the phone. And Liz Truss said of herself a few months ago that she wasn't very diplomatic. She's the new Foreign Secretary. So I have to say, I have some serious worries about this. And you know, we as a party need to be very, very strong with our internationalist agenda. Proud about Britain's role, proud about our capabilities, but making it clear where we can exercise power the most effectively. There's all that soft power that our country has, whether it's through the World Service, the British Council, and so on and so forth, or through being involved with international organisations and bodies. You know, the EU, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, all these bodies that have been weakened by people like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and Bolsonaro and all these appalling right-wing populists. We need to be the ones speaking up for these international bodies, because that's where sane, rational voices of countries that are progressive can get our voices magnified, where we work together and cooperate. To me, this is obvious, and it's just been so depressing to see the way that Boris Johnson has conducted British foreign policy against all the interests of our country, against all the traditions, indeed, of many Conservatives, actually. And let me give you just two examples where we need to show, as Liberal Democrats, how internationalism is so important and how international solutions with the UK showing leadership but working with others can be critical. The obvious one is climate change. I'm sorry to come back to climate change, but we've got COP26. This conference has rightly got 2 motions on climate change before it. I'll talk a little bit about this in my speech tomorrow. But however good we are in this country on climate change policy, and we need to be better, far better than the Conservatives, I said to a previous answer, we have to find ways to act globally which are effective and urgent and quick and just get results. And clearly that's through some of the negotiations at COP, but it's also taking responsibility for things we can impact globally. And I particularly think of the City of London and the fossil fuels that are financed through the London Stock Exchange, through the bond markets, the gilt markets, the pension funds and so on in the City of London. We control the regulations and laws in the City of London. We can change how the City of London operates. We can show leadership to other financial centres of the world, whether it's New York, Tokyo, Frankfurt, elsewhere, by making it clear that fossil fuel money will be banned from the City of London. We'll start with new money for exploration, but during a just climate transition, we've got to get to a point where fossil fuels for combustion are not financed in the City of London. Now that is quite radical. I'll say a little bit more about it tomorrow. I actually had an interview in The Guardian recently about it. But that would be leadership on climate, and it would be saying to the rest of the world, playing our role as an international country, it would show the way forward on this most urgent of issues. And when it comes to COP26, when we're negotiating with others, these negotiations are tough. I had the huge privilege of going to 3 COPs, 3 UN climate summits, one in Doha, one in Warsaw, one in Lima. I actually went to the one in Paris, but I wasn't a minister or an MP, but I gate crashed the party, as it were, because I knew a lot of the civil servants and I'd been involved in preparing the policy for Paris in 2015. I found out where the ministerial team and the civil servant team, British civil servant team, which hotel they were staying in, and I went and stayed at the hotel so I could find out what was going on. Amber Rudd, who was then Secretary of State, wasn't that pleased to see me, but I was determined to find out what was going on because it's so important. And you know, when you are at those summits and when you're finding out what different countries are thinking, you have to find ways to persuade people, persuade countries and governments and ministers to do things that they weren't intending to do. That's what a negotiation is about. And our government, Boris Johnson, whether it's because he's got this inward-looking, quasi-imperialist approach, whether it's because he's just incompetent, doesn't care, you can make your own mind up. His failure on diplomatic leadership of head of COP26 is an absolute disgrace. Now, first of all, we've got the fact that we've annoyed our European partners. We're not actually flavour of the month in the White House, in the Biden White House, A, because he sucked up to Donald Trump, and B, because he's messing up Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. They've managed to annoy other people around the world. And the worst thing, I will talk about in this speech, it's a bit, I'm giving you things away, what I'm going to say tomorrow, but it's because I feel so strongly about them. The aid cuts, the development budget cuts, they're just wrong, immoral, indecent, disgusting, and Tory MPs who voted that should hang their heads in shame for the rest of their lives. And it's wrong in principle because we should be tackling poverty, but it's also wrong in a pandemic. And it's wrong when you're trying to host an incredibly difficult negotiation on climate at a critical moment in the world's fight against climate change, that you irritate so many countries who had looked to Britain for support. I mean, this is the worst diplomacy I have ever seen, at a time when we needed the best diplomacy that we've ever seen. This government is letting down our children's future, our planet's future, and we should be out there saying it.
Thanks very much. And just time for Adam to ask a supplementary, if you have one, Adam.
Comprehensive answer, and I completely agree with you, because on soft power he's now breaking his aid cuts and allowing China to come in with their Beijing consensus within Africa and other countries in Southeast Asia. So I'm just wondering, how do we regain our influence within the multilateral world by working with like-minded nations, as you say, France, America, Australia, because obviously we're not either flavour of the month in Paris after the UCAS deal, where really France should have been involved as one of the major democratic nations.
Adam, you've put your finger on it. I couldn't agree more with you. We have to find a way to rebuild. I'm just not convinced this government's capable of doing it. That's a serious issue. I mean, this government's failing on so many levels. It's failing on education, it's failing on care, it's failing on business, it's failing on international relations, it's failing on climate change. It's a government of failure. And that's why we as a political party have to play a key role in getting rid of them. I'm not sure, Adam, that unless we get rid of them, we can rebuild Britain's standing. I think Boris Johnson is widely seen as incompetent and useless in many capitals around the world. I don't think he's got much credibility. And inevitably, other countries look at another country and look at their leader. And when they look at Boris Johnson, what do you think they see? I mean, they see the same person as we do. Someone whose word can't be trusted, who breaks international law. And so, as we campaign, as we deliver those leaflets, as we knock on their doors, as we try to beat those Conservative councillors, those Conservative MPs, you're doing it because you're part of a global mission to restore Britain's standing in the world. We are a proud nation, and any patriot should be joining us to defeat this Conservative government.
Thank you very much, Ed. And with that, we have run out of time for questions, but Ed did generously offer to provide written answers to all those who had submitted questions that we weren't able to cover. I'd like to thank my aide, Jenny Rigg, for her support today. And we'll shortly move to an auditorium break. But just before we do, if this afternoon's discussion has provoked your appetite, there is a very exciting set of fringes coming up, looking at Progressive Alliance, planning reforms, international development, housing, human rights, and much more. And a chance to learn about our affiliated organisations too in the exhibition. We'll be back in the auditorium at 18:45. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.